Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third program in our Outlander Highlands to the Carolina series, and the one with our favorite name, The Doctor is In, the 1700s, Claire Fraser and the Colonial Healing. We're so glad you're here. We hope that you've enjoyed the two previous programs and are as excited as we are for tonight's entry. I'm Bryson, and I'm here with Aaron and Heidi in the background. We're all librarians with Wake County Public Libraries right here in North Carolina's capital county and capital city. All right, you all know the drill. Chat will be off while I run through some housekeeping. We'll turn it back on for the program. Our program tonight is 1 hour with time for questions at the end, time permitting. Captions or transcripts from Zoom are available during the program. You can toggle those on and off as you wish using the button on the Zoom toolbar on the bottom of your screen. We are recording this, and you'll get the link to where the recording will live in the post-program email. We had a small issue with captions for Hunter's program, but that should be ready to go out real soon, so keep an eye out. The program is the third in our Outlander Highlands to Carolina program series, and we have many resources for you. Visit our webpage to learn everything. You can also sign up for the other programs in case you have not done that yet. Any information gathered tonight will also be put on the website and also go out in the post-program email. You know how that works. Lastly, please use the chat feature to post questions or chat with us or each other. If you asked a question in the registration form, no need to ask it again. We've got you. Take a second and set your chat audience to everyone so any questions you ask of us will make sense when we answer them. If you don't want to be distracted by the chat, you can turn off the chat previews by toggling the chat icon on the bottom of the screen on the Zoom toolbar. We know not everyone wants to chat, and that is okay. We also heard that the reactions, while super fun to use, can be distracted. So we're going to try out turning those off during Charles' actual presentation and then back on again during the questions so you all can spam him with hearts and claps then. Okay? Okay. Next up in the series, register for these if you haven't yet by going to the address you see at the bottom of the slide. And remember, we'll be sending out a post-program email that will also have that link in it. We told you you'd be seeing this slide again, and here it is. WCPL has a quick exit survey we would love for you to take part in. Scan the code on your screen or click the link in the post-program email and give us some feedback. All right, tonight's presenter, Charles Brett, is a volunteer and the lead medical interpreter at Tryon Palace in New Bern, North Carolina. He was previously adjunct instructor and volunteer at the Pasteur and Galt Apothecary Shop in Williamsburg, Virginia. Charles specializes in 17th and 18th century medical practices and professions in British North America to include domestic medicine, battlefield surgery, and maritime diseases and treatments. Charles has participated in many special events across Eastern North Carolina, including the Burgwin Wright House, Governor Caswell Memorial Site in Kinston, and the NC Maritime Museum at Southport. He sponsors colonial medicine workshops several times a year at the North Carolina History Center in New Bern and is frequently seen during many of the Outlander events held at Tryon Palace and other historic sites across North Carolina. Charles is a Navy veteran and retired hospital corpsman, and we are honored he is joining us tonight. Welcome, Charles.
Thank you, Bryson. I appreciate that introduction. All right. It's a little bit about me. Bryson got the wave tops, but a little bit more about me. I've been at Tryon Palace for about 8 years. All of that time doing medical interpretation. When I got there, they didn't have much in the medical interpretations for the gardens or for the historic site. So I just wandered in like I do as a usual history nerd and found my way into a volunteer position where for the last 8 years building medical interpretations, colonial medicine, battlefield medicine, and those things. And it's been a joy. I'm originally from the Commonwealth of Virginia. I grew up in a county next to Williamsburg. So I was probably destined to do something in Williamsburg in my lifetime. Um, when I got into medicine about 30 some years ago, pharmacy was my first rung. I did that for many years, and then went into teaching, and then went into more of the executive and management side, which is currently where I sit with Defense Health Agency. So I've been in medicine since I was probably 8 years old, and you wonder why that is. Is because one of my very first jobs, non-paying jobs, was actually working in a local pharmacy, uh, packaging up medicines for the pharmacist at the time. So I've been in pharmacies, apothecary shops most of my lifetime, and so thoroughly enjoy the modern practice of it, but really got into the historical part of it as I went through my career, and to the point where when I went to teach college and the professions at pharmacy schools, that my subjects were usually the history portions because I was the only one crazy enough to do that and thoroughly enjoyed teaching the history. And so that's kind of how I got into medical history, the things that are associated with medical history, physicians, the practitioners, all those types of things. So that's a little bit about me. I always like to say it's a brief PowerPoint, but I am not a death by PowerPoint person, so these will purely be more for the um, visual eye and not anything else. So give me just a second here while I share my screen. All right. We'll put it in a nice presentation mode. All right. So the title, as Bryson said, the doctor is in the 1700s. That is pretty much the century we're going to stick in tonight. That's where most of Outlander is set in the 1700s, and that is a long time. And you have to understand that in the 1700s, as far as medical practices, this was also the medical enlightenment period. So this is where a lot of things that have been practiced for almost 2,000 years started to take on a new scientific and a new dimension in medicine. And so, where it stems from the Europeans and Asia, it's also being translated into the colonies as well. And we'll see a couple of those as we go through the PowerPoint. So, I always like this kind of get my Outlander ties to this. I have seen the series, I have read most of the books to get my knowledge and research done. So a fascinating character with Claire. And as the books and the series start, as she does as an RN, as a nurse in the military, in the British military, and what she's done, she has been a lot of places. And through the 18th century, each of those places have different settings for medicine. Um, Scotland, France, this is European medicine. It's much different than in 1948 Boston, obviously. But even going into the later part of the 18th century, where we're in Scotland, Jamaica, and even going into the British colonies, which I kind of have to group the British colonies because we're in North Carolina, we're in Virginia, we're in New York, New Jersey. So we're kind of all over the eastern seaboard for a time period that she practiced medicine um, as many different levels as she possibly could. She was a character that explored not only the medical side of it, but with medicine as it was throughout the 18th century, the politics of medicine, the religion of medicine, the art and the science of medicine, the innovation of medicine. All of these things ran through Claire at some point in the series and in the books by Dinah. So it really paints a nice kind of singular objective with a lot of fiction wrapped into it, but a singular piece that we can look at as far as how medicine was practiced, how medicine was looked at, how medicine progressed, what we were privileged to know what medicine was like in the 20th century and how much it relates to what they did or did not know in the 18th century. And that's what I do in a lot of my medical interpretations is a lot of comparative medicine. What do we have today that we used in the 18th century, or what didn't we have in the 18th century that we do today? And I'll touch on a couple of those. So Claire's been through a lot of traveling, a lot of transoceanic voyages to practice her craft and her healing. So the first thing I usually get from guests when I'm at Tryon Palace is, who were doctors in the 18th century? And you see a couple of them here, some with white wigs, some with different hair designs, some with some different types of clothing. Uh, Really, doctors were any uh, professional that practiced some arm of medicine. Uh, Obviously, physicians were referred to as doctors, surgeons were referred to as doctors. Um, Apothecaries, apothecaries, surgeons, midwives, druggists. Some of those were referred to as doctors as well because they were in the importation exportation of medicine, and so commonly as they brought in medicines and exported medicines, they dabbled in practitioner side of it where they were asking somebody would come in and ask about their symptoms, and what they could use for that. And so they kind of played the role of doctor. And so they were commonly referred to as doctors. Um, Doctors in the 18th century also referred to non professionals, too. We did have doctors that were practicing medicine that was of questionable natures. And so we definitely have to worry about the quackery that existed. And there are many different articles on the quackery out there. But doctors in general is anybody that practiced or was a healer or something that did something in the arm of medicine, whether it was, selling you a particular medicine or herbal or treatment, whether it was visiting your house, whether it was relieving pain, doing splinting. As you see, we did it on land, we did it in battle, we did it on ships. So there's a couple, there's a lot of different terminology when we talk to doctors. Um, Doctors didn't necessarily mean you had a doctoral degree, that you had received professional training, and that you were in one of the arms of medicine was generally how we referred to doctors. Even in advertisements and newspapers, many doctors, especially on the business side, would be referred to as just as Mister. But their patients who they trusted and confided in usually called them by doctors. And when they summoned the doctor, they knew who they were summoning. So when I also talk about doctors, I like to talk about training a little bit. I get many questions about how to become a physician or who's a physician or what are the different types of medical professions that you would have in the 18th century. And so obviously the first one we'll talk about is physician. This is going to be your top tier medical professional. This is an excerpt from the Parents and Guardians Directory. There's actually another one called the London Tradesman. And what this is actually a book for young gentlemen to figure out from their parents what they should be when they grow up. So this is the excerpt from the physician in saying that the youth is intended to study of physic, and that's in the medicine, ought to have a very extensive genius, and need to be smart, clear perception, a sound judgment, and a retentive memory. All good things you should have in your doctor, even the ones you see today. Hopefully, they have good judgment, clear perception, and they can remember who you are and what your conditions were. He should have a liberal education of a gentleman, and that's very important because you don't want your doctors or your physicians to be in a box and only teach and practice in a box. They'll never know of innovations and how to advance practices. And so, liberal education was a key factor for young men studying physicians. Um, if designed to commerce as a doctor, likewise, they should have the purse of ones, which have to be today. So your doctors are going to be treating your wealthy class, your upper class, middle class. Lower class is going to be a little different depending on who's available, and what type of medicine they're willing to practice. They are in the business of medicine, so they are going to charge for their services. And many people in the lower middle class couldn't afford that level of training and that level of access to care with a physician. And so we'll talk about a couple of how they became hybrids through the other professions we'll talk about in just a second. But that was a physician. And generally, a physician would be they would go to primary school. So they're going to study Latin, they're going to study math and some science, they're going to study some liberal education, philosophy, things like that before they head off to basically an internship with a physician to gain status. To get into medical school, especially if you're in Edinburgh, Scotland, or London, England, or if you're going to Germany or Dutch, those physicians had to be well known with the colleges and European cultures, so that way they could get their students in. So they had to have street credit, like to call. So they would sit with and learn under a practicing physician for an extended amount of time, usually 2 to 3 years, just kind of all depends on the student, until they were able and they were signed off where they could go attend medical school. And this is obviously going to cost a lot of money, because when you go to medical school during this time, you're actually living in the college or you're living with the physician. You are constantly in a student status. You are observing, you are attending classes, you are traveling, plus your room and board, all those things your parents will have to pay for, and you're not making any money as of anything at that time. So, physician training is your college level educated professional. They are also going to see a lot of the worldwide diseases. They're going to see the epidemics. They're going to see a whole host of medical conditions and how to treat those, surgical interventions, surgical practices, all those things, botany, herbals, midwifery. They're all going to have that huge knowledge of a physician to come back to the colonies and practice. And so they're going to have a tremendous advantage to them. Now, the problem with physicians in the 18th century, especially in the colonies, is that we didn't have a lot of them. They mostly migrated here just for status, maybe to dip into other things like politics. They were certainly in governments. Many of them were merchants, they were owners, they were plantation owners. And so they dealt in business along with their wealthy friends and comrades, that they needed medical care, and they would have physicians come over and do those roles. Your surgeon is kind of your middle class of medical professionals. As stated here in the London Tradesman, the surgeon, simply as a surgeon, is only employed to cure the wounds, bruises, contusions, ulcers, eruptions of outward parts. And they talk about trepanning and cutting, amputations, and things like that. He applies only topical medicines. He only deals with the outward parts of the body. He's not worried about the inward parts of the body. Really concerned with any type of applications inside the body, nor does he know anything more about pharmacy than the topical medicine. So think of your surgeons today, who you would hope knows the inside and the outside. In the 18th century, they were your mechanical arm of medicine. So they were just going to be, you know, the the workers of medicine. They are chopping things off, they are removing things, they are pulling teeth, they're doing all sorts of type of things to remove things from the body. And obviously with Claire, that was her general practice when she went to medical school, was become a general surgeon. So this is kind of where she lies at between that physician and surgeon. Surgeons were apprenticeships to begin with. So they did go to primary school, they did do apprenticeships, but then they moved away from that and went totally to surgeon, and they would study under a surgeon for about 7 years. And um, my key thing that I always bring up with my guests is usually I talk about how old physicians and surgeons were. Surgeons were going to be in your early 20s when they're doing the majority of their work. So think of any young 20-some-year-old today, male, that's going to be your primary surgeon in the 18th century. Where are they doing their business at? Mostly on the battlefields, mostly with the militias. They would have surgeons in town, so you could call for the surgeon if you needed to have some type of surgical care done. There are other trades that also did surgery. Barbers did certain types of surgery. Apothecaries did surgery as well. Speaking of apothecary, this is going to be the apothecary. All familiar with the apothecary. This is your modern day pharmacist. The apothecary, simply as such, is employed in compounding medicines by the doctor prescriptions without spec to their quantities. So apothecaries up until 1600s, 1700s were mostly just there to fill the prescriptions or the receipts of the doctors. Because they were in the business of stocking their pharmacy and filling boxes, ships boxes, medicinal boxes, and things like that, filling prescriptions, receipts from patients, and also patients just coming in to visit them for just simple symptoms. Um, they started to deal more into the physician side of it, which had great quorums in England. With these were two separate professions at the time. Apothecaries were of the grocers guild or the spice guild, where physicians were of the medical guild. And so there were two different lanes that they practiced in, even though they had a lot of similarities in how they dealt with patients, talked to patients, and treated patients. This is a mere apothecary, a profession that requires very little brains. As you can imagine, your pharmacists today, hopefully they have a little more brains than what the London tradesman wanted out of the young men. He wants a strong memory to retain such a number of cramped words in his daily conversations. There's no branch of business. This is no branch of business by which a man less money to set him up. So it doesn't really cost much to become a pharmacist or an apothecary. Your parents would probably pay a dowry to an apothecary who was already professionally trained, and they would do an apprenticeship as well for about 7 years. And so when they talk about 10 to 20 pounds judiciously, just kind of give them a ballpark of how much it's going to cost to train your son to become an apothecary. Once they graduate or when they have acceptable number of years, they're just given a small little piece of paper that says you can practice apothecary, go set up your own shop and your own business. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, about apothecaries and their businesses shortly. And then the last one I'll talk about is the druggist. This was your Amazon shipper of the day. Their job was a business is to buy up large quantities of medicines, uncompounded, and then they would sell them to the apothecary, or they could sell them directly to the pharmacist, but mostly to the apothecaries, so they can compound the medicines, and then the apothecaries would dispense them. But they were referred to as a profession at the time. This was mostly a business venture, commodities of medicines. But some medicines were well expensive, and some of them were more expensive than gold. The top three expensive herbs of the time were, believe it or not, black pepper, cardamom, and saffron. In fact, today, cardamom is still the third most expensive medicinal herb medicinal out there. So I just did a workshop on that on cardamom. So their job was to get those medicines from the distributors, from the sources, and into the apothecaries. So I'll talk a little bit about medical theory because, like I said at the beginning, this time it is a lot of transition of medical thoughts and theories and processes. And when we talk about medical theory, most practitioners prior to the 18th century, even into the 18th century, and even to the 19th century, their predecessor of medical teaching, medical logic, medical theories of how the body works and how the body works with other things, how it relates to the environment, was Mr. Galen. And also, I did put him up here, but also as Hippocrates as well, and Diocles. Those gentlemen were really the precursors to what medicine was practiced for almost 2,000 years. They were based on humoral medicines, where they divided the body up into four humors. And you can see the body was in the little diagram. The four humors were blood, which were consummated with air, with phlegm, which is consummated with water, yellow bile, which was with fire, and black bile was with earth. They were also attributed to the seasons, so summer, winter, spring, and fall. And the theory with humoral medicine was that the body was made up of these humors and they were balanced. And if you felt well, that your body was balanced and the humors were balanced. When the humors become unbalanced or when they have that bad mixture or dyscrasia, that's when illnesses, distempers, miasmas, those type of things come up in your body. And it was the physician's job or the physic's job to restore those by either means of getting rid of too much of a humor that may have been over abundant in the body, or by replacing the humor in some form of further medicinal or mechanical ways to balance the body out. And so that was the basis of modern medicine, contemporary medicine for well over 2,000 years. It was well practiced in the colonies. It was attributed to a lot of the medical theories how we think the body works, how we think the body associates with, bad air or bad water or conditions or climates. Those all thought they had to have something contributed with either an increase or decrease in humors. Claire did not practice much of the humoral medicine. From her time in the 20th century, she was probably more familiar with Herman Boerhaave, who was a Dutch physician, and he looked at more of the body as a machine or mechanics through physical and chemical properties, and that there are fluids in the body that attribute it to sickness, too much fluids, not enough fluids. There are symptoms that exacerbate mechanical conditions in the body, for other words, like breathing or circulation of the heart, the blood, whether you're hot, whether you're cold, they were all contributed maybe to some type of mechanisms or mechanics of the body. He was also the founder of clinical teaching with observation in the 18th century. This was a big part of physician teaching, was going to hospitals, going to poorhouses, almshouses, and churches, and studying and observing how a disease started until its treatment and until it's resolved, whether that be by death or whether it was healing, and then the after effects of that illness or distemper. And so it's really about watching the patient, how they go through their symptoms, how they go through their disease process, and then what can we use to help uh, through humoral teaching and also mechanical teaching. How can we to disrupt that to get the body back into balance? He was also the father of physiology. So when students today, they usually take an anatomy and physiology course. So we're not just studying what the body looks like, what the heart looks like, where it's located, how many chambers, the lungs, two sides, different bones, nerves, and things like that. We also want to know how does the body intertwine its mechanisms and its fluids together to make the body the way it is. And so that was a very important aspect. And this kind of kicked off our scientific innovations in medicine through the late 18th century and into the 19th century. So very important. So those are the big theories that I talk about. And just remember that doctors, when they practice humoral theory, was a theory. So it was, I think if I give you this, I think it will make you better. You can imagine going to your doctor today and saying, I think we'll try this and I hope you get better. And if you don't, we'll try something else. You may hear that, a little bit on the undertones, but they even some of it, that's what we call it, practice in medicine. It's not a direct and a standard, and important of the liberal education that we do have these theories that come out, and a lot of theories came out during this time. Always a common question I get with my guests, and certainly the palaces and the other historic sites through the times, even at Williamsburg. What were the common ailments and distempers of this time? So in the 18th century, if you have it today, you probably had it in the 18th century. It may have been called something different, maybe given a different name. When we study medicine, we're studying a lot of, especially on the apothecary side, we have to study a lot of ledgers. What are we dispensing a lot of that may lead to what type of symptoms people are having? And that may lead to what type of ailments they're having or what type of diseases they're experiencing. But common ailments they're going to have in the 18th century, we have today headaches, indigestion, cough. Those were the common ones. Headaches could be a number of things, whether it be a migrainal headache, a temporal headache, what area of the head did it hurt? Was it a symptom of something else? Maybe you're dehydrated and you had a headache. So headaches took on a lot of different forms of what the headache was, what the pain was like. Was it throbbing? Was it constant? Things we ask you today about headaches. Indigestion is a big thing, especially in the colonies. We have a lot of problems with one, the imports of food, the growing of food, and the preservation of food. Everything is not FDA approved, USDA stamped in the 18th century. So food preparation and preservation, I talk about a lot because that's what's making people sick. If you visit towns like Philadelphia, Boston, let's go North Carolina, Wilmington, Eaton, New Bern, a lot of times those markets, those marketplaces where they're selling their commodities are sitting in wastewater, chamber pots, horse excrement, dog excrement, the wind blows all that around. Miasmas are floating around. That's going to get into your food. And if you're hungry, you're just going to maybe eat it raw or as quick as heated as you possibly can. You're going to develop some type of indigestion, some type of stomach ailments that you may need either home remedies or have to visit the apothecary for. Coughs, fevers, and pains. We certainly had different descriptions of coughs. Were they wet coughs? Were they dry coughs? Did they produce anything? Were they coughing up blood? Things we asked today, we asked in the 18th century. Fever, fever was, are you all over fever? Are you sweating fever? Are you profuse sweating fever? Does your fever come and go? Is it intermittent fever? Um, does it stay constant? Does it cause any other things? Those type of fevers all have different types of descriptions in the medical books. Pain, obviously, everybody had some type of pain, whether by mechanical means, by having a musket ball go through you, by falling, by having a cart run over your foot, all those type of things. They're going to be something. As you see what Claire deals with in the Outlander series, a lot of different types of pains. Sometimes she's causing, sometimes she's not, and trying to remedy, but pain is a big symptom in the 18th century, along with inflammation, because inflammation and pain can coincide together. If something is swollen and making and taking up space, that's going to cause pain as well. And so physicians were tasked with trying to figure out, is pain caused by the inflammation or is it caused by something else? Another one that's talked about frequently is loss of balance. Them having not with themselves or not in themselves, not in the distempers of themselves. So loss of balance and insomnia. People didn't get a lot of sleep in the 18th century. Long work days, long travel days, conditions that were just not very conducive to insomnia. If you're traveling up and down the coastal highway, you're going to have a hard time getting sleep. And so apothecaries were frequently visited for things to help treat with insomnia. Some causes of ailments and distempers. Obviously, trauma is going to be one of those. Epidemics, I'll talk about here in a second. Hygiene, not keeping yourself clean, not keeping your clothes clean, not keeping your food clean. All of those hygiene elements are going to cause ailments and distempers and bacteria that we didn't know about yet, and protozoas and fungus and everything else that comes in with food and also drink can make you sick. Lifestyle. Were you an agrarian lifestyle? Were you wealthy? Wealthy people tend to develop gout more than the lower class because of the buildup of uric acid from all their diets that goes along with their food preparations. But they would just eat large meals throughout the days, and so they would develop parts of gout. Travel. Where are you traveling to? And when I talk about travel in this context, I was also um, continental travel, intercontinental travel, traveling transatlantic, transpacific. That's going to cause ailments, scurvy, typhus, typhoid. They're all out there, and I'll talk about that in a second. Food preparations and also genetics. Your mom and dad, your grandpa and grandpa always give you some type of mal genetic tempest that any of these things can exacerbate. So genetics was a big thing. Didn't know anything about genetics during this time, but looking at the history, the race, the sex, different types of cultures, practicing cultures, religions, all those type of things, all played into effect. Also, genetics was an underlying cause of some of these ailments and distempers. So we talked about epidemics. There were a lot of them, and this drove a lot of our medical interventions and treatments and what we're using. But we're still practicing that humoral that theory with some of that mechanics. And so, obviously, our biggest epidemic is going to be smallpox. That is the predominant epidemic of the 18th century. It is an imported epidemic. It is not indigenous to North America. We had to, and it was brought in from all over the world. Most of the ports all up and down the East Coast had smallpox epidemics, usually 10 to 20 years in increments. Smallpox is one of those things that it once it goes through a community or a town, it eventually fizzles out because it's either infected everybody and everybody's immune, or it's killed off everybody, or people have just left that area. And so the virus eventually dies out. But as it becomes more imported in, as imports come in, those sailors and merchants and people aboard ships are bringing that smallpox vaccine. And so as generations go through that are not immune, that have not been exposed to smallpox, they'll come back up. And that's where you see those epidemics going over and over again. Yellow fever was another big one. We experienced that in Wilmington, New Bern, Eaton, Norfolk, all had bouts of yellow fever. You notice they're all port towns. Tuberculosis, that was discussed in the books as well. A couple of bouts with tuberculosis that Claire dealt with. Measles, influenza, dysentery, malaria, camp fever, typhoid. They were all out there. They were all very, very hard on the body. If you were not at top team, pristine condition in your body, these epidemics and diseases could take over your body very quickly and deteriorate your body very quickly, shut down organs, shut down different processes, and really make life miserable for you. On the other side of it, if you survived, and keyword survived, your body is now been exposed to it. So, like smallpox, you'll have some immunity, but you can experience several bouts of yellow fever, scurvy, dysentery, malaria. Those are not immunity type epidemics. You can experience those over and over again, especially without the treatments. You can have prolonged exposure to it. Smallpox was one of the few that we had inoculations for. I talk a lot about on site about smallpox and inoculations. We relate that most recently when we had our COVID epidemic. Smallpox was kind of an equal. They tried to make it equal. It was not equal. Smallpox mortality rate was well into the 20-30%. COVID was 0.00001%. So we were not even talking on the same scale. But smallpox was much responsible for a lot of Native Americans dying in large, huge amounts. And that had a lot of political and community ramifications. Also, epidemics, I just kind of put this in here with a couple of Mentos to Claire. Smallpox, it's a viral disease causing fever, influenzas, respiratory. With smallpox, they originally thought it was a respiratory illness, that miasma, bad air, was causing the smallpox to transmit between people, and really it wasn't. It was this virus that was getting people sick. But when you have a lot of people in a little area, you get a lot of infections real quick. Malaria was mosquito borne, along with yellow fever. But malaria was one of those things that was introduced into the colonies as well. It came from the Bahamas, Jamaica, also South America. Those mosquitoes would be on board ships. They would feed off their host and prey, and then they would get sick with malaria. They would be introduced into the colonial ports, and they would have large problems with malaria. Malaria was one of those that could result in death in less than 3 or 4 days. So it was a very serious illness, and you saw throughout the books in the series, malaria was predominant. Tuberculosis as well. That's a bacterial infection. Don't know anything about bacterial infections, but we are dealing with the signs and the symptoms and the breathing issues we have with tuberculosis. So regimens, so I'll talk about regiment treatment. So a regimen was what apothecaries could also deal with surgery. So where you think about Colonial Williamsburg and that apothecary shop, some up in Virginia and Philadelphia and Boston, those apothecary shops, a lot of those apothecaries also had surgical backgrounds. And so because that would provide an additional service to their patients. But what they were mostly commonly prescribing was what we call a regimen. And so that's going to be a combination of medicine, but also diet, exercise, preventive measures to collectively aid in the body healing. It's much like your doctors today. If you're sick and you go in, they'll prescribe you an antibiotic or something for allergy, some type of remedy for a cough. But they're also going to tell you, maybe you should watch your weight. Maybe some weight loss will be helpful. Maybe adjusting your diet. Poor diet, poor exercise in the 18th century was predominant. And that's why people, when they got sick, they got really sick. And it was so part of that medical professional, that practitioner, not only to prescribe something, but also kind of dig into What are they eating? What are they drinking? What are they exposed to? Should they rest? Things like that. So regimens were very popular to prescribe in apothecary shops and with your physicians. Cures for ailments and disorders were rare in this time. The total cures of things were very rare. What we were treating were symptoms. If you had a cough, we treated the cough. If you had a fever, we treat the fever. Um, it wasn't into the 19th century, 20th century, when we started to talk about pathology, or we're talking more about, why are these things occurring? What symptoms, what bank of symptoms are occurring together to cause this disease or distemper? Medicinals and procedures were used for basically four outcomes. We were either going to bleed you, we're going to make you sweat, we're going to make you urinate, we're going to make you defecate. And obviously, we'll talk about bleeding here in a second, but all the medicines, medicinals, and procedures we were designing to do, and you notice there's four of them, trying to line up the humors to make sure you're balanced, but also trying to make sure that the symptoms, your systems were not overloaded or being underutilized, trying to beef those up. So bloodletting, we'll talk about that real quick. Bloodletting, there are a couple of different techniques. Bloodletting was your go-to treatment in the 18th century. Many, all physicians practice some form of bloodletting. Apothecaries practice it. Surgeons certainly did it. And it even trickled down to the lay people where they thought they could do some bloodletting because they've seen it, not so much on TV, which didn't exist, but they saw somebody doing it and thought that they could do it, especially when you had a bad access to care issue. You may not be able to get to a physician or a surgeon in time. So you just kind of, well, I saw them bloodletting from the arm to treat this, so I'll kind of do the same thing. And as you see in some of the series, that can cause problems. But venesection, arteriotomy, those were the common bloodletting. Um, Venesection, basically using an arm or a leg to find a vein or an artery, and we're going to bleed a certain amount depending on what type of condition that you have. The primary tools, and I have them on display at the palace, is the fleams or the lancets, and there are different types of fleams for different types of bleeding, for different types of areas of the body, and sharpness. There's travel kits, there's gentleman kits, all types of things. And my little fun fact for this is that bleeding a patient was actually modeled after a woman's menstrual cycle. It was thought that women had their periods once a month that would cleanse their body with the bad blood. And so the theory with bloodletting is that your blood was bad. And so that we need to mechanically bleed you versus naturally bleed you. So just fun fact with the bloodletting. So Claire was big on the herbs. It is I'm not an herbalist by trade, but I have learned a great deal about herbs over my time in colonial medicine and medical interpretation. There's a herb and a plant for just about everything. As Providence says is that God had created the disease and distempers. He created a medicinal or an herb for it. We just had to put the two together. So there are all types of herbs that are discussed throughout the books, remedies or online sites. There were things for depression, urinary tract, for diabetes, high blood pressure, those were terms we didn't use in the 18th century: high blood pressure, but we did use fever, varicose veins, depression, things like that. But there were symptoms that mimicked those things, and that there were either home remedies that we were using or professional things that we were using, things that we found throughout the world through trade, especially along different types of trade routes through Asia, through Middle Asia, Middle Russia, and into European. They had a lot of herbs that would, and even South America, they would come up into the colonies and be introduced. Now, it's really going to depend on what could grow in North America and what we had to import. So your apothecaries, even though they would have herb gardens for your travelers, most of the herbs were not dispensing in the apothecaries because you can grow it there. Most of the herbs and medicinals through plants and some animals we're actually getting in are, have to be sold in an apothecary, and that's where you're getting a lot of those from. So the things that Claire would be asking for is probably indigenous more to her British and her European understanding of herbs, and trying to get some of them to grow here in the colony, especially like North Carolina. Now, some things could be transplanted. We can transplant things like valerian. We've transplanted things like willow bark. We've transplanted things like lemon balm. So there's a couple things that we have been able to, colonize and bring here. but there's many things that just doesn't grow in this climate. And so that's what a lot of studying among treatments in this time was, what could we get our hands on and what do we have to go buy? And this is the common ones I found through Outlander, and all of these I have in my pharmacy, my apothecary shop at the Palace. I certainly have peppermint and valerian, fennel, garlic. Foxglove, not so much. That's our basis for digitalis. That's poisonous. But comfrey, that's great for bruises, and that's great for external uses. Ransoms as well. White willow bark, that's our basis for salsalin, where we get our aspirin from today. It was grown in Europe. It was also grown in the mountains of North Carolina. So the natives introduced the colonists to white willow bark as well, just the different varieties of it. But these are all things that Claire would have sought out, would have tried to grow, or try to partake in, or try to have the apothecary get for her. I'll talk about battlefield medicine real quick, because we do have a lot of wars and skirmishes and militias, and we're going through a revolution, a few of them, either through the America's Revolution, French and Indian Wars, and certainly with the battles of Culloden. All those talked about in the series. Battlefield medicine is kind of a whole topic in itself, not just from civilian medicine, but we'll talk about military medicine. What are we looking at in a battlefield? Well, obviously, if they got weapons, either through cannons or musket, or any type of thing that shoots metal out, gunshot wounds, lacerations, bruises, contusions, fractures, impalements, amputations, and PTSD. And so when we talk about amputations, at least I practice in both modern medicine, battlefield medicine, and 18th century medicine, is that amputation was an injury. So the cannon or something would come and amputate part of your leg. When we talk about it in medicine, we're using amputation as a preventative measure, not a treatment. Is to, the amputated part is going to most likely fester up and cause some type of disease or some type of illness within your body. And so the goal was to get rid of that. As that tissue, as that part is dying, it's going to make the rest of your body sick. So a preventative measure, a surgical preventative measure, was to complete the amputation. But the injury, types of injury you could sustain in battle, were certainly amputations. And that's from the head all the way down to the foot. And then also PTSD. We saw that in many things in the series, flashbacks and things to battle scenes and battle situations, even with childbirth, even any traumatic event. It doesn't have to be battlefield. We relate PTSD now to a lot of veterans and battlefield, but PTSD can occur anywhere in a medical profession, but also any type of post-traumatic episode, we like to call it, that you have. They were there, but we didn't know it as PTSD. We didn't understand it as PTSD. We understand it as maybe you're a little crazy, maybe you're a little insane, maybe you were withdrawn, you had that 1,000-yard stare and things like that. And so we thought maybe you were becoming more insane. And so treatments would be just to place you in a building all by yourself and use really innovative and off the wall techniques to try to bring you out of that. But whereas today we know a lot more about PTSD. During this time, we didn't have much information on that. So what professions were involved with battlefield medicine? Surgeons. We have surgeon mates, nurses. Yes, we have nurses. They were usually male nurses, but they would be in your field hospitals. They would also be in your homes. They would be in your churches. So there, when patients come back from the battlefield, convalescing in certain areas, that you may have people taking care of you. Also, family members were your biggest nurses. Drivers, people to drive the carts and the ambulances to get the patients back to the field or back to the convalescent areas or back to communities, and also druggists. We got to get the drugs out there. Types of treatments in battlefields. We're talking about bandaging and splinting, obviously, removal of foreign bodies. We're going to take things out that shouldn't be in your body, bone setting, and completing that amputation. All of these things were practiced as part of surgery. Dr. John Hunter from England was a big proponent of battlefield medicine, a lot of innovations. Hunter's a familiar name in the series. We were talking about Mr. Hunter that was up in northern North Carolina in the Dismal Swamp. John Hunter was a very well-known physician for surgery and developed a lot of different techniques to help with stabilizing and treating of battlefield injuries, such as bone setting, replacing, splinting, and bandaging. Um, where do people go for medical care? I always get this question a lot. Where did you go? Today, we think of doctor's offices, urgent cares, hospitals. But a lot of it started at your home. Home remedies, what your grandparents passed down to you. Some were in cookbooks, some were in other literatures about how you can do home remedies. You most likely had an herb garden. Most of those herbs had medicinal properties, so you had medicinal gardens. Apothecary shops, obviously, where you if you couldn't grow it or you couldn't have access to it, you probably went to an apothecary shop to get the imports, to get the things that we couldn't grow here. House calls, physicians are coming to your house and diagnosing you and mixing up the medicines right there for you to take. Field hospitals, sick bays on ships. There's areas set aside on ships for injuries and illnesses. Hospitals for public health. And when we talk about public health, not just for keeping sick people away from all the healthy people, but also for the insane. And Colonial Williamsburg has one of the first public hospitals in North America. So when we talk about public health, insanity, craziness, those type of things were also a public health issue that they dealt with in the 18th centuries. And so we had places we started to set aside buildings and properties to contain those people from the rest of the populations. What are some medicinals we still use today? Here's a very small list, but there's many more out there. Quinine, when we were treating malaria with cinchona bark, that's your basis for quinine. Camphor, the things you rub on your sore muscles at the end of a workout. We were using camphor externally for bruises and treating external injuries. Epsom salts were used for a purgative to help you throw up. Sulfur was used for wounds as well. Senna is a laxative. Senecot S we use today is on their shelves. Senna we had to import. Willow bark for your pain, for your mild aches and pains. Opium we still do today. That would be laudanum in the 18th century. Today that's going to be your morphine. Your paregoric as well, putting opium inside of cough syrups and paregoric and making that a purgatory. Calcium using for indigestion. We had indigestion in the 18th century. We were using calcium carbonate. We're using that mostly from shellfish. Today, we find that in a wrapper we used to call Tums or Rolaids. And then leeches. Yes, we are still using leeches today. Leeches were, rootism medicine was very popular in the 18th century. We are still using it today. In controlled environments, one of the jobs I used to have was being the leech master at the hospital I worked at, where we were using leeches for skin grafting and to help recirculate blood through traumas. So the leeches were certainly being used in the 18th century. That is a whole topic on itself, but always a fun topic to talk about. Was there something, anesthesia or something that knocked me out? Not quite. This is always a big question about anesthesia. They were calming agents we would use like valerian, lavender, opium, alcohol, to kind of sedate you, but we really didn't want you drunk during your surgical procedure. So we didn't give you a lot of alcohol. It was more enough volume to kind of sedate you and relax you. But, where Claire is experimenting and using ether, ether wasn't first used during surgical procedures until 1842. So she understands ether. She's using it in her practices. Certainly in the 20th century, we get to a lot more anesthesia and anesthesia delivering devices. When in the 18th century, using different types of procedures, ether is alcohol based. And so those type of things could be done, but ether is not exact. We don't know exactly how much to give people. Many people died under ether because we just gave them too much. We just put them in a permanent sleep status. Sometimes we didn't give them enough and they woke up in the middle of the procedure. And today we have a lot better apparatuses to help making sure you stay asleep during your procedures. During ether and even up to the 19th century, especially in the 18th century, we didn't have that ability. Were there any vaccinations? Yes. Only really one inoculation for smallpox. And inoculation I talk about is that's basically placing a specimen or pus from a mild patient that has smallpox into a healthy patient and hope to develop immunizations for immunity for life. Vaccines developed in the later 18th century through the 20th century after discovery of cowpox. That's where where cowpox was very close to smallpox. And when the person that developed cowpox was exposed to smallpox, he didn't get smallpox. And so that started the vaccination with Dr. Edward Jenner in the late 18th century and how we developed vaccinations. Vacca is the Latin term for cow. And so that's where we get the term vaccination from, is from cowpox. Adults receive most of the vaccination in early America, where today children receive most of them. The theory was with the vaccinations is that we wanted to protect the adults because they were the ones making the money. They were the ones that could reproduce. And so to keep families going, we want to make sure that the adults were treated. The children, because they were sick and very quickly could die of vaccinations, they didn't want to waste that material on children that could die very quickly. And so they gave it mostly to adults. That was a predominant theory at the time. We know it a little differently now, but that's how they thought about it. Outlandish treatment, boy, there are some out there, and this is not even close to a full list. But I'll let you kind of look at some of these. Crocodile excrement to promote contraceptive and fertility. Yes, I said crocodile. Always my favorite one for this, especially for a male, rubbing an onion on the head to stimulate hair growth for balding. Yes. Maggots were in the series as well. Maggots were used to treat infected wounds. They did that. It wasn't a predominant treatment. It wasn't used quite a bit, but maggots were used. Tobacco smoke enemas, yes, in the 17th and 18th century to warm the body and to stimulate respirations, exactly as it says. Mouse excrements that would help with coughs and toothaches and other ailments, predominantly toothaches. So there are a lot of treatments, and if you ever come to the palace and visit me, please share your treatments that you come up with, because I always love hearing about these. I always run into these through primary sources. So there's always fun. So this slide here basically is just kind of on the left. How we advertise things in the 18th century was through newspapers. And so this is my advertisement for Newbern about how what I have in stock. I just got a big purchase in. And so normally apothecaries would post the things they have in their shop and to come and buy those. Also, I always give a little bit of a how I'm trained, and that I was trained under good, reasonable, resources, and that I'm not just selling you a bunch of quackery stuff. But apothecaries did have to, because they were a business, promote their businesses, and they promoted it through newspapers. And you'll see these all throughout the 18th and 19th century. When you get into the 20th century, they get really extravagant about what they're selling and how they're selling it and what they're curing for. So the last slide I talk about is just Tryon Palace, because I have to give my shameless plug here for Tryon Palace. This is where I do most of my interpretation. A little bit of background. Dawn had touched on this on the first episode. It's the first permanent capital of North Carolina. Prior to that, wherever the governor sat was where the capital was at. It was built between 1767 and 1770. We did have two royal governors, Governor Tryon being the first, obviously named for the palace, and then Governor Martin. It remained a capital until 1794, and it burned down in 1798 in the cellar, possibly due to excessive hay and humidity. And so that's a little bit of kind of the background. But Tryon Palace is a wonderful, if you do a bucket list of North Carolina sites, especially in Outlander, you have to come to Tryon Palace. This is where the intersections of regulators, taxes, politics, culture, innovations, and just community all comes together at Tryon Palace. We have a lot of exhibits talking about the early parts of North Carolina through the North Carolina History Center all the way up until today's time. And so it's a great must stop on your tour of Out Carolina if you're visiting our Outlander sites. We do have Outlander tours once a month. Our last one is in November, but we're going to start a brand new series next year. I will be involved, of course. I will be doing a lot more of my medical talks, interpretations. I do workshops every quarter where you, as Claire's apprentice, and myself, as the apothecary surgeon, can run through her medical chest, and we would actually make 18th century recipes from Claire's inventory. So make sure you're watching the events page for Tryon Palace when those come out. They are very small groups, but if you have a large group or a group that wants to do like a kind of a one-on-one, just let the office know and we'll be happy to set something up for you. We have a lot of things coming up in the new year, especially for the 250th. And so we definitely want to get as many people out there to understand and enjoy North Carolina history. That is it. And I will see whatever questions I can get in the next few minutes.
Thank you so much, Charles. That was a great presentation. Yeah, we're going to go over a little bit. I know we usually end things right at 8, but we wanted to get to at least a few of the questions here in the chat. This came up in a couple of different ways, but this feels like a good distillation. There was a lot of questions about kind of when would cleanliness and sanitary conditions become important in medicine?
Yeah, that's talked about right in Galen's time as well. Uh, Medicine should be a clean process. So we talk about cleanliness and sanitation, or um, the body should be prepped. And when they talk about prepped, it should be bathed and clean. Mostly they're talking about more like dirt-free. Clothing should not be dirty when we're doing and working around surgical sites. That's why we usually take their shirts off. We usually wipe off the dirt. Surgical instruments were not sterilized at this time. They were made of wood. They were made of steel. They were made of all types, other types of um, metals, and so we didn't really want to wear them out by deep cleaning them all the time. They were just more of a comfort use. So if they were bloody, we're cleaning them off with water and rags, and that's it. We didn't know about bacteria and how disease. How that bacteria transitioned from surgical wounds and from illnesses. And so we understood that it had to be a clean process because cleanliness did have benefits of positive patient outcomes. So we did have relations in that, but didn't understand the bacterial side of it, not until the 20th century.
All right. And this was something we actually talked a little bit about before the presentation, but what's one modern medical thing that would have saved the most lives if they had been available in the 1700s?
Yeah, and when I get this question, I think of three things, and the obvious one's going to be antibiotics. Obviously, with the invention of penicillin in the 20th century, they had that in the 18th century. The the diseases, the infections that occurred after surgery, after trauma, all those things on the battlefield, and certainly with the epidemics, antibacterial certainly would have been um, very nice to have. The closest we have, and we do have herbals that had antimicrobial properties, but how much do you take? How much are you getting out of it? How do you prepare it? Those were all things that are always in question, so we couldn't be precise about it. Antibiotics definitely one of the things. The other ones, as of today, I'm a proponent as well. Vaccinations. If we could prevent all those epidemics from happening, we don't get the sick people, and we don't need the antibiotics for it. On certain things. The viruses, yes, with the antibiotics are not going to work with the virus. But to preventive medicine side of it, vaccinations, those would have been very, very useful in the 18th century. And as far as equipment, I go to back to battlefield medicine, that's tourniquets. In the 18th century, tourniquets was considered a special medical device, and we only used it at the surgeon's table. Today, troops, sailors, soldiers, airmen, they're given first aid kits when they go out to battles and conflicts and things like that. And if they do have something where they have a significant injury, they're known to put a tourniquet on, and that saves time. If we had those on the battlefields at Monmouth, at Yorktown, Moore's Creek, all those battles that we faced, if we could apply those tourniquets and stop the bleeding before, to give time to get back for the surgeons to try to do something, that could have saved many lives. So those are the three things I always bring up.
All right, we'll end with one last question here, and it'll be a little more Outlander book related. If you have a personal favorite medical treatment or surgery Claire performed in the books, and maybe how accurate it was.
Yeah, always a common question. The medical historians that we when we watch things on fiction base, were always like, "Oh my God, they never did that," or "They would have never done that," or "Wow, that's pretty cool if it ever happened." um, so that lot of myth versus factual things we did. You know, the one scene I like when she was confronted with the surgeon, the predominant surgeon, and there was a lot of questions back and forth, and she had to kind of almost prove herself that yes, I can do this surgery at your education level, because women back then they didn't practice medicine professionally because the classes didn't think they could do it. They couldn't stand the blood. They couldn't stand the enduring time of being a surgeon. So when she's performing any of those medical procedures in front of professionals, those were always, very interesting to see, how really would it have been in the 18th century versus how it was played out on screen. Certainly, the availability of the herbs would have been one thing. Yeah, lily of the valley, when we're finding willow bark. Also, when they had when they found epidemics and things that they thought would you know cure something right away, it didn't necessarily do it, or they were just on the wrong track, and she kind of guided them a different way. That was also a thing. And you also noticed in a couple of the scenes where she's dealing with professionals, professional surgeons. Surgeons were designed to do something quick and then move on. Where if you just spend a little bit more time with them, maybe you could have done some more treatment. They were on quantity versus quality, and so she really went into this quantity. So there's the factor. There's not one favorite that I have. There's always ones that are just, aha, there's a greater. I don't think so. But those are the ones I like to see.
Great. Well, thank you again so much, Charles, for the presentation tonight. And I want to say you have to make it to Tryon Palace if you haven't been before. It's a beautiful area, great history to learn there. So, thank you all again for joining us tonight. And as we mentioned, we'll have a recording of this available for you all soon. But until next time, hope we see you at the next program. Have a good night.